All right, hello and welcome to Unit 5. Wow, goodness, I was about to say Unit 3, but we are way past Unit 3. Unit 4 was last week, and now we're on to Unit 5. Time is flying by, which is wonderful on many levels. You're doing good work, and you're learning a lot, I hope. And we're getting closer to the end of the summer semester and to the fall. So I know some of you will be continuing on with classes at Duquesne, and hopefully looking forward to seeing you on campus and all the other things that the autumn and fall semester will bring. But thank you for your hard work. And this is our last unit of coursework. So some notes that you need to be aware of as we're getting ready here for this last portion of the class. I'm going to pull up my screen. I think you can see this here as I share it with you. This is the syllabus here. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm pulling this up here. At the end of July here, 17th is the start of Unit 5. You can see that here. We've got your regular assignments that you'll be working on. Zoom office hours, of course, are available. I highly encourage you, if you have any questions about an assignment or about your final paper, please reach out to me. This is a great time to be doing that before we get into finals week. And Zoom office hours are a great time to be able to collaborate and work together. If you have any outstanding assignments that you've been working on, please make sure to get those in here by the end of this week. That will help as you go into finals week. And yeah, this week you've got chapters 8 through 14 of conflict between persons. You're doing the introductory video now, your C&Qs, your attendance and participation discussion board posts, and your case study for Unit 5. This is 4 here, but this is actually 5. All the numbers you see sometimes when you look back at something. It's a good reminder that writing isn't writing, it's editing. I talk about that in the video. If you haven't seen the video yet for your final paper, please go look at that. That's on Canvas. It was under last week's materials, where I talk about what it means to write the final paper and some kind of tips and advice for doing so. But the big thing is writing is not writing, just getting it down once. Editing is what really makes good writing stand out. So there you go. You've got kind of the idea of what we're doing this week, and then into next week. Next week is finals week. You're going to be working all week on your final paper and studying for your exam. So you'll do that, and reach out to me if you have any questions. But that will all be available on the 24th. The final exam will go live, and you'll be able to turn in your final paper. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this. And I'm going to start sharing our presentation for the day. So with this being our last big conversation about the texts that we've been going through, I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are in the discussion boards. And what I've done is kind of similar to what I've been doing for all the texts that we've been reading through together, because we're covering so many chapters. I'm not doing a lecture on just one chapter. I'm pulling from all of our readings and highlighting some things that are important and interesting. And I've done that here in this presentation. So let's go ahead and look at Conflict Between Persons, chapters 8 through 14. And again, this book is framing for us where the authors believe the origins of leadership are. And the origins of leadership for the authors of this textbook, it lies in conflict. There's something special, there's something important about conflict, about difficult conversations that requires an ability to lead, an ability to take responsibility for situations that we might not get if we avoid conflict, if we don't have conflict. And so here are some important concepts related to those ideas. So the book talks about internal conflict. And internal conflict is really interesting because we've done a lot of talking about the conflict that takes place between persons, right? I mean, even the title of this book is Conflict Between Persons. And what kind of conflict happens internally? Well, there's a concept in communication called intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication is the communication that takes place internally, right? It's the kind of communication that we have almost, if you were to say you're talking in your head, if you were having a conversation with yourself. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the movie Inside Out. It's a Pixar movie. It's kind of cool, but it has a lot of conversations the main character has with these emotions that are inside their head, right? The emotions in their head are represented as these little animated figures, these other things that are all going on at once. But as people, we kind of have that going on anyways, right? We have things where we're angry about them, but our better judgment says, hey, it wouldn't be smart to punch this person in the face because we're angry at them, right? Or when we're sad, we might still have this feeling that things might get better someday, or maybe vice versa, right? Really happy, but also aware that life's short and it's fleeting. We have these intrapersonal sort of dialogues that happen within ourselves. And it's important to recognize that sometimes there can be internal conflict in our lives when there's something that seems to be tearing at us. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with difficult conversations that are taking place inside of our own heads, right? Uncertainty reduction theory is an important communication theory that can help with understanding some of this. So the premise of the theory is that people self-disclose in order to reduce uncertainty about their self and others in relationship, right? And the authors of this theory have done a ton of work. There are multiple different axioms and thoughts, and the book goes into more details on those. But it's helpful to note here that uncertainty reduction theory has to do with disclosure. It has to do with personal disclosure to reduce uncertainty. I feel this oftentimes, the need for disclosure to make things feel right. So even it's something I've had to learn is to do less personal disclosure just to make myself feel better, to reduce that uncertainty, right? Because that's my tendency. And instead learning, hey, what's appropriate here and what's not appropriate here? And how do you have a level of peace, a level of calm that you can cultivate and develop, even when maybe you're not disclosing everything, right? this need to reduce uncertainty through disclosure, although it can be a good thing too, right? Uncertainty reduction theory is not saying that self-disclosure is always a bad thing. Sometimes it's quite good. It can help in a relationship for people to understand where another person's coming from, what their motivations are. But it's also this line of what's public and what's private, right? And that conversation takes us into another set of terms that are used here. And one is the idea of emotivism. And we may have talked about this a little bit, I think, in other lectures, but emotivism is this idea of decision-making by personal preference, only by personal preference, right? So this is coming from the work of Alasdair MacIntyre, and he talks about emotivism being this state where we don't make decisions primarily because of whether it's our social groups or what's good for our community or family, but emotivism is this idea of it doesn't even have necessarily long-range planning involved in it. It's not necessarily selfish in the same way that we think of being selfish. It just says, I feel this way, and so I'm going to do this in the moment, kind of regardless of what other people are feeling or how it might affect other people or those kinds of things. Emotivism is decision-making just by personal preference. It reminds me of the 2-year-old, right? Who, and I was this 2-year-old who ate like a gallon of blackberries without any regard for what it might do to me, what it might do to my digestion, right? I did it because I liked blackberries, right? And so I ate 2 gallons of them. And as you can imagine, my parents were cleaning blackberries up from both ends for 24 hours, right? After I ate a gallon of them. And they were really young when they had me. And so they didn't know better and to stop me from eating 2 gallons of blackberries. But emotivism is the adult equivalent of that, right? You have these things and it's made, these decisions are made by personal preference. I want the blackberries, I want all of them. And I don't have regard for my own limits or the limits of reality around me. Individualism comes out of emotivism in some ways. Individualism is what happens when everybody is operating out of decision-making by personal preference. Individualism happens when a person's whole life is centered around themselves without any care or awareness of the other, right? Individualism, Arnett and others talk about individualism as a social disease, where we begin to not see, we begin to cut ourselves off from communities, and we begin to isolate and turn inward in such a way that's really problematic. Now, it's not a problem. They're not saying that it's wrong to look out for yourself, to be aware of yourself as an individual. That's different. Individualism is kind of a societal issue where we have no concern for the other person or for the communities that we're a part of. All right, some other things here, some terms that come up in our readings. This is in chapter 10, conflict styles, and this was really interesting. I'd be curious what kind of conflict style you might have, and maybe that's something you want to mention on the discussion board. You're welcome to if you want to. No pressure if not, but that could be interesting to talk about. But these are some of the conflict styles that the authors talk about. Conflict avoidance, which is doing everything possible to avoid conflict. I joked, I think, a couple of videos ago about being the founding member of the Conflict Avoidance Club, and it's true. This is my style, and the next one. But conflict avoidance tries to avoid conflict at all costs, right? If somebody's wanting to talk about the issue, you'll change the subject. If there's a way to get out of conflict, confrontation, you're going to take it, right? That's a style. And now, this isn't always bad. Sometimes conflicts can be silly, right? There are some conflicts that don't need to take place, and that are really my wife and I experience this sometimes when life is busy and hard. We're tired, and maybe we're up late, or we're driving, or something like that. And just how your senses get heightened when you're tired, and everything becomes annoying or difficult, right? And we realize, oh, hey, we can get into a conflict here, into a fight or an argument, but really we're just both tired, and so we're gonna choose to listen to music or talk about something that is easy, because we don't need to get into conflict over things right now. We're tired. That's what it is. Get some sleep, we'll be better, right? So conflict avoidance is one style. Accommodating conflict style is another. And this is where someone accommodates the other person's point of view, always sacrificing their own opinions, their own thoughts, so that the other person is happy. And so that conflict, in some ways, it's kind of a conflict avoidance itself, because the conflict never fully happens, right? It happens in the sense that both have different opinions, different things, but one person might not express those. They might just kind of cave in and give in. And sometimes this is helpful, right? Sometimes it's helpful to be accommodating, especially in terms of respect for people. I've had moments with people that I really respect, who are maybe older, and they're really set in their ways politically. I have a lot of love for them. I think of some people that I grew up with who were like aunts and uncles to me, and they're in their 70s or 80s now, and they have really, really strong opinions on some things that I disagree with them on. And there are times where I will focus on what I agree on with them in some of these moments that could be conflict. I kind of cave in a little bit, because really it's in that moment, it doesn't always seem worth sacrificing the relationship for the sake of being right or conflict. And that's, I think, where accommodating becomes a helpful tool, is when the relationship is more valuable than the conflict itself. And so you accommodate the other person and their viewpoints. You kind of cave in a little bit, but it's meant as a way of respecting the other person. Now, obviously, accommodating can be taken way too far, and it can be really toxic in a relationship too. When one person is always accommodating the other and caving in, that's not a healthy relationship, right? And so that's something to be aware of. Competing conflict style. So this is the conflict style that at its best can help us all be more excellent, right? It's this kind of thing where Um, maybe you're competing to have the better answer in a conflict. You're competing to show who's smartest or who's going to be the most forceful or the most generous, whatever it is. But all of the conflict revolves around this idea of one-upping the other person, right? And that has dangers and at its best can lead us towards excellence. Compromise conflict style is where all the parties involved, if there's two people involved, are compromising. They're giving up some of what they want so the other person can get a little bit of what they want, and they get a little bit of what they want, right? There's one piece of pie, we're going to split it in half, right? That's compromising. And it's helpful. It's good to be able to compromise, but sometimes it leaves all parties kind of unhappy, right? Collaboration is the final style that's talked about in the book. And this one is more textured than compromise. It requires you to participate directly with the other person to identify creative alternatives, right? So instead of just splitting the pie, the leftover pie in half, it could say, well, why don't we split the pie in half? But I'm also going to bake some brownies and you're going to make some homemade ice cream. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have half a brownie, a scoop of homemade ice cream, and half a piece of pie. And you'll do the same. And it's going to be amazing, right? It's going to be way better than just getting the whole brownie even would be. So it's not just compromise, it's collaboration, right? We work together and we created new solutions where there weren't any before. Curious, what conflict style do you think you are as you're hearing more about this? Impersonal responsibility. So Emmanuel Levinas talks about impersonal responsibility, and this is important, and I'm only going to be able to touch on the surface of this. So go back and read more in your book. I'd encourage you to do that. But impersonal responsibility starts with impersonal engagement, which is attending to those beyond our relational connections. Think of the people that you engage with that you really like, your parents, your siblings, best friends, things like that. Those relational connections are important and they're good, and they often dominate our sense of responsibility and our sense of care because they're people we're connected with, because we have a relationship with them. But Emmanuel Levinas would say, hey, wait a second, we actually have responsibility that goes beyond just the people that we know or like or are connected to. We have responsibility for the people that live in our community that we've never met before, for people who live in our world who might be hungry or suffering from a bunch of different circumstances. We have responsibility to those who are not even born yet and who will inherit the world after us. What does that look like? And this impersonal engagement, it has awareness of people that we're not just connected to, right? Genuine relational sensitivity, and this is what comes out of this is a sensitivity towards relationships and those we're connected with or not connected with, requires attentiveness to what's before us and a rejection of the impulse to demand repeatedly that the world conform to our wishes. Have you ever met someone like this before? Now, don't name names, right? Keep this in your head. But have you met someone before who repeatedly demands that the world conforms to their wishes? Not a really pleasant person to be around, right? Pretty problematic. Think of these moments in your own life where you've lived in a way where you've demanded that the world conform to your wishes. And the people that might have damaged, the people you know, the people you don't know. I have those moments in my own life where I have demanded that the world conform to my liking and to my wishes without regard for people that I knew or their preferences or even unintended consequences that would come out of my actions, right? Relational sensitivity pays attention to those unintended consequences. Too much personal involvement. So this is kind of going back to our idea of impersonal engagement. If we become, it's almost like I've heard the term relational colonization, and this idea of becoming so tied in with the other person that we begin to try to make them in our own image. We try to make them like us, right? And that can go into the realm of possession. So too much personal involvement takes you to a place where you think I can own the other person, I can possess the other person, and that sounds pretty bad, and it is in a lot of ways. This idea of beginning to lose sight of the other person as an individual and as a person who has their own hopes, desires, and dreams, and seeing them as just a character or an actor in the sitcom that's my life, right? When we start casting others in supporting roles in our own sitcom, that should raise red flags and warning signs. The book talks about Gollum, the character from The Lord of the Rings, who has the ring, the one true ring, and he becomes increasingly obsessed with it, and he calls it my precious, right? And there's this ownership, this possession that Gollum has of the ring. But as he does that, it begins to possess him, right? It begins to, everything in his world centers around his precious. And so we get into this place of things being problematic. Arnett also talks about the managed smile, which is this idea that you have to conform to maybe always being happy. I don't know if you've been in a place or a situation where you felt like you always had to have a managed smile, a smile even when you weren't feeling like smiling, a smile that was managed, right? If you've worked in public service, you've probably had this. I worked in fast food for about a year when I was in high school. And even if I was having a really horrible day, I'd still have to have a smile and kind of put that on. That's a managed smile. And if we demand managed smiles out of the people in our lives, that becomes an issue, right? It goes into this realm of possession. What the authors are trying to have us do is think about impersonal responsibility that thinks through these kinds of things, even for those that we don't know or have a close personal relationship with, but still engage with responsibly. All right, we've got 2 more slides here. Performative trust is another important term from the book. So this is when relational sensitivity and the impersonal, we talked about both of those, are played out together. Performative trust, it's a rhetorical sensitivity that tells us what matters. So this is coming from the work of Judith Butler, and she describes the notion of identity, like who we are, that it's constructed in performative actions, right? Identity is constructed through specific performative acts that are socially shared, that they're done in community with other people, and they're historically situated. They happen in a real time, a real place, at a moment in history. And identity is constructed through the performance of language, gesture, all manners of symbolic social signs. So what she's saying is that we construct our identity by doing things, right? I constructed my accent, my way of talking, because I grew up in a home with a dad from Oregon and a mom from the South, from the deep South. And so my voice has a particular way of speaking. My siblings sound similar to me, right? So it's performative. And I learned to speak as I spoke, as I performed, as a 2 and 3-year-old getting words, right? And what the authors are saying is that we get trust that way too. Trust is performative. Trust comes out of relationships. When we realize in a friendship, maybe we have a moment where we forgot something, or we had a moment where we were reaching out for help, or we were going through a tough breakup with someone, and we reached out to a friend, and that friend was there for us. Performative trust is being built, right? Because they listened, they engaged, right? And so next time we know when something hard is happening, that we can count on that person. We can rely on them. It's how performative trust takes place, is over time in relationship. Butler accentuates the dialectic of the individual and the context or environment, with each kind of influencing the performative acts that we do in those contexts. All right, so we learn over time who's worthy of trust and where we're safe, right? This is an important topic in the idea of conflict. Who can we trust? How do we trust them? That plays out over time, performative trust. Destructive conflict is this last concept. So divisive conflict unnecessarily separates persons through problematic conversations that lessen the credibility and influence of another. So divisive conflict is in sharp contrast to communicative practices that invite friendship, right? So there's this idea of divisive conflict. Almost, it's like if you were standing on a a big sand dune, and someone kept taking scoops of the sand out from under you, and things are sliding down, right? It's someone chipping away at your credibility without reason for it necessarily. Divisive conflict is something that the authors want us to avoid, something that can be problematic. Instead, what the authors point us to is this idea of friendship, of relational kind of conflict that prioritizes the health and the well-being of the other person, not at our own expense, but it keeps those things in mind. It doesn't chip away or undermine at the other person's credibility. It seeks to build up the other person and build up the relationship. One important concept from communication theory is the idea of critical theory. So critical theory, actually, it comes from law and from legal scholars. And it's made its way into communication and a bunch of other disciplines. But critical theory at its best, it gives us the tools to ask questions about relationships, about power structures, and say, what's going on here? And if it's constant critique, it can lead to an issue, right? Hannah Arendt talks about this idea of critiquing or tearing down just for the sake of tearing down, versus what's healthier is tearing down for the sake of rebuilding, right? So when we have critical theory united with this commitment to the relational health and well-being of the people around us, it allows us to understand what might be problematic and then be able to be constructive in the way we try to approach the situation. I hope this was all helpful. This is chapters 8 through 14 of Conflict Between Persons. And the last unit here in this class, good work. Proud of you and the work you're doing. Please reach out to me if you have questions as you finish this unit and get ready for your final paper and final exam. Looking forward to getting to read those answers, but also most importantly, your papers. Excited to see the topic you choose and what those will look like. Take care, everybody. And yeah, I guess this is the last unit. So I hope to see you on campus sometime and hope you have a good rest of your summer.